We're joined now by Chloe Cole, and I think we need to hear Chloe's story because it is important. Chloe, welcome to the platform. My name's Sean. It is very nice to meet you, albeit by phone.
Good morning. Thanks a bunch for having me.
All right. Look, I haven't done a lot of background reading on you because I think the best way to approach this is for you to tell us your story. So we know your experience. Firstly, Chloe, how old are you?
I'm 19 years old.
Okay, and you're from the US?
Yes, I am. I'm from California, from the Central Valley.
All right. And I take it you were born there, 19 years ago, into relatively normal, or as even normal we are, circumstances?
Yeah, I was born to a pretty normal family. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. And I've got 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters.
All right. So, normal upbringing, big family. Well, unless you're a Catholic, that's a small family. What happened to you when you were 12, Chloe?
When I was about 12 years old, I started to feel a bit confused about my identity in terms of my sex. And I started to experience what my doctors later referred to as gender dysphoria. I started going through a bit of an early puberty at 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old, actually. Between those 2 ages, right before my 4th grade year, my breasts started developing, and with that came a lot of uncomfortable tension and feelings that I felt like were coming too soon and just too early for me, and I didn't really feel like I had much guidance around. I also was a bit of a tomboy growing up. I felt like I related a little bit more to my male peers and my male role models than the girls and the women around me. And I often felt as though there was something that just fundamentally made me different from everybody around me, and especially the women. And I felt there were a lot of times.
Well, at the age of 9 or 12, the kids, the girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were a lot of times when I felt like I would never be like feminine or pretty or like the other girls enough. And there were times when I questioned, like, well, just why wasn't I born as a girl, as a boy? Why was I made female when I feel like I would be so much happier if I was a boy? And when I learned about the transgender community through online communities, this kind of served to confirm my feelings. And
that there was an alternative.
I finally had an answer as to what my identity really was and why I felt this way about myself. Okay,
so you found this material not at school or anywhere. You just found it online on the internet at the age of 12.
Yeah, it was through social media, and it wasn't like talked about celebrities who were transitioning or like influencers or anything. These were like kids my age who were talking about being transgender and about their feelings, very similar feelings to what I was experiencing growing up.
Yeah. And how did that progress then at the age of 12? I understand you started taking puberty blockers at around 13. How did you get hold of them? How did you get them prescribed, etc.?
Well, the more and more I interacted with and observed these communities, the more I felt like I related. And eventually I decided that I, too, was a transgender boy. And I decided between a few names. I started to make a social transition and change the way that I presented myself. So, like, through boys' clothing, shorter haircuts, and trying to act a little bit more like my big brothers and the boys around me at school. And eventually I decided to slowly tell more and more people in my life about this.
How did your parents react to this, Chloe?
Yeah, when I told my mom and dad, they were pretty shocked because, as a parent, you don't really expect to hear anything like this from your own kid. And this is something that they never had really dealt with any of my older siblings. So it was completely new to them, and they knew that it was a mental health issue, but they weren't really sure.
So they didn't take you to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a counselor?
Yeah, so they started having me speak to a therapist who they thought that would help me through working with these feelings, and that I would just be encouraged to explore this through self-expression and not really through any permanent means. They didn't want me to go through a transition. They never believed me throughout any step of the process to be transgender or a boy or their son. They just wanted me to learn how to be happy in spite of this.
Yep.
But that never happened. When I went to therapy, well, they didn't allow my mom and dad into the room, so they didn't know what was happening.
Who
or
provided
what was
the therapy? Was this
life.
publicly provided? Was it privately provided? Was it through the school?
It was through a private healthcare provider. And it was through our same healthcare provider. And so mom and dad were completely in the dark about what was going on.
You're 12, right?
So they decided to take matters into their own hands and just talk to the therapist and the psychologists themselves. And what they were told was, well, she needs to do this right now because this identity she has is something that is innate. It's something that she knows for sure. She knows what she wants. And if you deny her of this healthcare, well, you're going to have a suicidal and very potentially dead daughter.
Okay,
on your
so
hands.
the what was presented, you go to a private healthcare provider, you are isolated somewhat, or your parents are pushed out of the picture a little bit. This is the age of 12, right, Chloe?
Yep, 12 going on 13.
And the private healthcare provider presents to you and your parents that you should transition to be a boy.
Yes.
Wow.
And there really was no pushback on this idea or the identity that I had. It was basically
How
just
quickly was
accepted
that
as a fact.
decision made by these so-called professionals?
I mean, as soon as I mentioned, like, these feelings of dysphoria and feeling like I was a boy, they just immediately went with it. And they weren't really making any discernments as the adults in the room who were supposed to help me and my mom and dad through raising me through this. It was basically my judgment as a naive, isolated, lonely child.
Wow.
That basically led the entire path of this. There was no real pushback. There was no questioning, really, of where these feelings really came from at all.
Yeah. In retrospect, do you feel like they just saw you as another person to process?
Absolutely. I mean, especially like as I'll get a little bit further into this later.
The people who saw you, Chloe, were they gay? Were they just normal, everyday people? Did they look, and I'll use the term woke, did they look like they had an agenda?
I don't know. I mean, I would say that they definitely had an agenda, for sure.
Mm.
But they looked like all sorts of different people.
Mm. Yeah. So you went on, the first thing they do, they get you on the puberty blockers at what, the age of 13, Chloe?
Yes, I was 13. So I was already about 4 years into puberty.